I have been on kibbutz, living in community, for 46 years. And that is almost half the history of the kibbutz movement. I also have 3 children and 6 grandchildren living on the kibbutz. So I guess I'm qualified to say Lotan, out of 280 kibbutzim, is unique because it has 4 things together. Number 1, it is a collective kibbutz. I'll say a few more words about it, but only 1/4 of the kibbutzim today are collective. Number 2, it is associated with the Reform movement in Judaism, so it has a particular cultural, religious orientation. There are only 2 such kibbutzim, and one of them is not collective. Number 3, we are the only kibbutz and the only village in Israel belonging to the global eco-village network. Number 4, thank you for the clapping, that's not on the account of the 5 minutes. Number 4, we are one of the very few kibbutzim that has a vision statement. You can find it on our website. A vision statement is very important. In the Bible it is written, where there is no vision, the people become unruly. And the kibbutz movement began as a group of intentional communities. That means they had an aim, they had a vision. Number 1, to settle and develop agriculture in the land of Israel. Number 2, to create on a micro level a society of Hebrew culture, social justice, self-labor, which would reflect what we wanted to see in the macro culture. That was the original idea of the intentional community. Today, after the establishment of the State of Israel, this became problematic. I'm doing this very quickly. About 30 years ago, Israel went through a major change. It's almost equivalent to the turnabout in Eastern Europe 20 years ago, not quite as extreme. And that major change had an impact on the kibbutz movement, which is still felt today. The major change was external and internal. External, we come to the period of time when you have Thatcher, Reagan, and in Germany, let's say Helmut Kohl. In other words, the end of the welfare state and the beginning of neoliberalism, also in Israel. Within Israel itself, we have 3 major changes. We have a change in the government as a result of demographic developments. You must understand, kibbutz members are not representative of all Israeli society. They're a very small part, about 30%. For example, the people who are very religious, they're not in it. The Arab minority is not in it. In addition, the people who are refugees from the Arab countries or their descendants, more or less are not in it either, and they are about 40% of the population. So, in the late 70s, the labor government, which had been supporting the kibbutzim, went out. A liberal government came in. There were economic problems in Israel. The economic problems added to the ideological problems in the kibbutz movement as a result of the changes in the population. And therefore, the kibbutz movement in part began to privatize, meaning that they became communities like you describe here, where people begin to want to have their own homes and so on, and have their own jobs. My first kibbutz, Gesher Hazi, is totally privatized. All this process of change in Israeli society and the Israeli kibbutz resulted in the situation that 5 or 6 years ago, the government had to decide to define kibbutzim in a new way, within the framework, the legal framework of the Cooperative Societies Act of the State of Israel, which actually originates from the British cooperative societies law of the 19th century, because the first cooperative societies were in Britain, in Rockdale, 1844. So anyway, this law was now changed, and there is now a new definition of kibbutzim. There are three different kinds of kibbutzim. Number one, there is the classic collective kibbutz, such as Kibbutz Lotan. Number two, most of the kibbutzim are privatizing, and therefore they have a definition of everybody is responsible for themselves. They have to have minimal social security. But for example, they will also have to pay each individual. My three sons who are on a privatized kibbutz will all have to pay individual income tax to the government. Not like my kibbutz Lothan, where the kibbutz pays for everybody, except we are too poor, we don't pay income tax at all in kibbutz Lothan. We don't reach the threshold. The chartered accountant said last year, he said, I have the good news and I have the bad news. The good news is that maybe your economic situation is a little more stable. The bad news is that maybe next year you will have to pay income tax. So this is the situation. Now, what then, the third, but the most interesting kind of kibbutz today is the third kind of kibbutz. The third kind of kibbutz is a city kibbutz. In other words, no longer is it a question of settling the land. It is a question of creating, if you like, an urban environment, an urban cooperative settlement, which has the mission to upgrade and work socially with underprivileged people and to contribute educationally to the underdeveloped areas of Israel. Now, the people who founded these kibbutzim are actually the grandchildren of kibbutz founders. They have said, we do not want to do what our parents did, to leave the ideas of the kibbutz and ideals of the kibbutz of social justice. What we want to do is to realize those aims of our grandparents, but in a setting which is relevant to the problems of Israel today. So in fact, in a new kind of way, the kibbutz movement is rising, shall we say, from the ashes with these city kibbutzim. Now, one last word. The kibbutzim today are only 2% of the population in Israel, and they were never more than 5%. So we understand we're talking about a very small movement, and nevertheless, the kibbutz movement in the 20th century has been the largest collective movement with about 120,000 members. Today it's about 100,000. And so we will see in the 21st century, in the next 100 years, where that movement is going to go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.